the lens of climate change, presented by myself and by
Julia.
And Antonio.
All right, let's get into it. So first, we're going to give a little bit of an index. We're going to start our discussion through developing our talk through the lens of a fictional climate refugee who's going to be called Sarah. We're going to give a little overview of Sarah's story through three critical perspectives: the perspective of environment, the perspective of economics, and the perspective of politics. And as I just said, we go through the analysis of those and then give a final conclusion of our findings and offer some solutions for all of you on how we might be able to solve these problems or mitigate the risks and problems.
Okay, so this is Sarah. She is a 19-year-old Sudanese woman, and she works on a farm in the Darfur region, which is heavily impacted by flooding and soil degradation, and so she can be defined as then a climate refugee. So the environmental analysis. First, we'll look at flooding. Sudan specifically has been recently very impacted by severe flooding, which has impacted everyone living there. This happens because of violent storms and higher than average rainfall, and really impacts specifically agriculture just because of it basically kind of makes it hard to farm when your land is flooded. And then it's also important to note that about 65% of Sudan's population rely on the agriculture industry for their food and for economic support. So it's their work, and it's their livelihood, and it's the way they eat. And then this flooding specifically has impacted food insecurity for around 18 million in this region specifically. Flash flood damage impacts infrastructure, it impacts, again, the actual fields for planting, and then also we can note that stagnant water creates issues with diseases and stuff like that. So not only are these people dealing with their homes being flooded or the land they work on being destroyed, but also there's more diseases occurring, and this would impact Sarah, possibly putting her out of work or losing part of her food source. Then also soil degradation. Soil degradation is caused by hotter than normal temperatures, unpredictable rainfall, and the overuse of soil. Especially with climate change, this has been perpetuated because rain has become more unpredictable in an already dry region. And then also hotter than normal temperatures, of course. And then also if the land is overused, especially in such an area where so many people, like I mentioned in the last slide, rely on this land for their food, the land is severely overused, causing a depletion of nutrients in the soil, which is what soil degradation is. It's basically a loss of nutrients biologically or physically. Yes, and then we can also note that Sarah, in this case, would lose work from soil degradation and have an inability to find food. And then also soil degradation results in a loss of biodiversity among plants, and biodiversity among plants is important for natural protection against flooding. And so we can go on to the next slide. These issues compounded make it substantially harder to farm and to just live a stable life. Basically, poor soil quality with flooding on top of it leads to, again, difficulty to farm, and then people are out of work, people are out of food. And then also we can note that this has a greater impact on the Sudanese people because of these things. Together, these issues are very detrimental to someone's quality of life, and so they would deeply impact Sarah, and they are impacting many people in this region, causing them to have to move to find better working conditions and better food sources, simply ways to live. And then this is not only happening in Sudan, but also on a global scale. Climate change is really perpetuating these issues. Many, such as Sarah, are being forced to move simply due to the inability to eat and to work. It is estimated that by 2050, around 1.2 billion people will have been displaced due to these issues alone. And then we can also just, I don't know, actually, yeah, basically. Anyway, next.
Alright, so now I'll be going over the economic analysis of the climate-induced migration. So the factors that I'll be analyzing during this presentation are the infrastructure damage, the unaffordable prices, the resource scarcity, and the economic opportunities. So first off, we have the infrastructure damage. So climate-induced migration can lead to great infrastructure damage. So this has several consequences, such as the loss of population, which basically leads a massive movement of migrants all over the world, and refugees. Then we have the direct costs associated with the infrastructure damage. So basically, infrastructure damage can cause the destruction of many physical places, and obviously there's a lot of costs related to that. Then the loss of productivity, which basically explains how the delays on transportations like roads or railways or cargo shipments can delay productivity on transportation networks. And lastly, we have the paralyzed economy, which is basically explaining how during this period of time economies can completely be stopped, and this can affect severely the economy of the country. So then moving on, we have during these periods, usually countries have unaffordable prices for that period of time specifically. So, for example, many people in certain parts of Africa cannot afford to live daily, since they do not make enough money and their salaries are pretty low. And so if prices increase due to environmental factors such as floods or desertification, people will be forced to migrate to other countries to have better quality of life and better expectations. Then for resource scarcity, so usually we have the example of desertification, which can cause droughts all over the area. And this obviously would reduce the availability of farmable land. Then for rising sea levels, same with the desertification. When the level of the sea rises, makes creates a lot of droughts all around the coast, so affecting industries like the agricultural or industrial. And lastly, you have the droughts, as I said previously, which basically shows how reducing water availability again can affect industries like mainly the agricultural, but other industries as well. And a clear example of this would be the Sahel region or area in Africa, which has been currently experiencing droughts that have displaced millions and millions of people. And then for economic opportunities, so first off we have the filling workforce gaps. So this basically explains how migrants displaced by climate change often relocate to regions experiencing labor shortages, which usually they have vacancies in industries like agriculture, construction, and healthcare sectors. Then we have the increased consumer base, which explains how migrants contribute to local economies by consuming goods and services, creating demand for products and sectors such as the housing, retail, and transportation. So just basically how the consumer base increases when a lot of migrants are displaced. Then for economic dynamism, so obviously the flow of migrants can strengthen economies by introducing new energy and new skills, fostering an environmental of increased economic activity. And lastly, you have the diverse perspectives, which basically explains how migrants can bring diverse skills, knowledge, and cultural experiences, basically foster innovation on the economic of the country.
All right, so now we move on to the political analysis of what exactly happens to climate refugees in a, well, climate risk zone. So first I'm going to talk about Sarah's story, kind of contextualize the entire, I guess, paradigm or idea of climate refugees through her specifically, and see what the political ramifications on her and on Europe could be as well. Then we're going to the idea of what exactly is a climate G, what a climate refugee, what exactly are the legal implications of that, and if there are any, I guess, protections afforded to them. And finally, look at the impact on European politics of refugees and climate refugees more broadly. So, conceptualizing through the idea of Sarah, we already realized through both the environmental and the economic analyses that living in Sudan for her sake would be almost impossible. And in this case, she has to become a refugee or be displaced. Now, most refugees coming from Sudan, they either leave by bus or by foot, and they generally go to Libya or to Tunisia and then take a water route to Europe, where they can claim asylum ship or be called something that's called irregular. Now, in the case of Sarah, she arrives, let's say, in France, in Marseille, and she applies for asylum ship, but the big question is, will she actually get it? There's a big difference between what's called an irregular refugee and a regular refugee, and we'll get into that in a little bit, to what classification would Sarah fall into. So to explain the difference between what a regular refugee is and a climate refugee is, we're going to have to look at more of a macro scale and analyze both terms individually. So a refugee is someone who's displaced from their home country due to persecution based on either sex, religion, ethnicity, politics, any one of these major themes. And what happens is that they are afforded legal protection under international law. That means they can apply for asylumship, and they also have, I believe, 2 resolutions by the UN that protect them in international law. Now, a very similar matter is being claimed for the climate refugee. They also are displaced from their homes due to the fact that it's dangerous to live where they currently are. Whether that's regular refugees being displaced due to conflict or war, or climate refugees being displaced due to flooding. In both instances, they're not able to stay where they originally habitated in. The main difference is that climate refugees are afforded no legal protection under UN law or international law. They fall into this gray zone, which makes it very difficult for them to get the protections they need or the protections they deserve when they leave their country and apply for asylumship. And in most cases, applying for asylum can take anywhere between 1 and 6 years, with the US being a very large example of how the asylum system is broken and not working for the vast majority of people. And we'll get into this later. This is information that will be contextualized in some of the later slides. So I want to talk about displacement specifically within Africa. Now there's 2 terms to know. There's internal displacement and external displacement, and they basically mean exactly what they sound like. Someone who's internally displaced is someone who's displaced due to conflict or a freak weather event within their own country. External displacement is the opposite, whereas in conflict and freak weather events displace someone, but they have to leave their country of origin. We have a map here, this is created by the UN, that shows areas of high refugee displacement within Africa in relation to high and extreme climate zones. High risk areas are in yellow and extreme areas are in red. You see that around West Africa, in Sudan, in the Congo, these are all areas that have extreme displacement and also high climate change risk. So globally, since about 2014, there's been about 220 million people internally displaced around the world. Example, this could be the Somalia floods in 2023, in which 2 million people were internally displaced, or the Florida hurricanes. You'll see on the news a bunch of people driving up the highways to the north, to the Carolinas, to Alabama, to escape the path of destruction. These people would also be classified as internally displaced peoples within the United States due to climate change. Now globally, there's about 90 million people currently displaced due to climate change. That means externally displaced due to climate change. That means that, let's say, in the case of Sarah, you're displaced from within your country, and rather than going to a different part within that country, you decide to flee. That can be to some place that's close by, for example, fleeing to Egypt or to Kenya, or it can be, in the cases of what we're analyzing right now, to Europe. So this is a little flowchart of the path that refugees, or the numbers that we come behind what happens to European migrants, and specifically European migrants who are related to climate change. So in total, like I said, about 220 million people internally displaced, about 90 million people are externally displaced worldwide. So in total, there's about 2% of the European population that is classified as refugees, both regular or irregular. There's about 8 million people in total. Each year, that number is added to by about 380,000 irregular refugees. In the US, they would probably be classified as illegal, but that's not the politically correct term. So that number is a little bit controversial because many of those people are not able to apply for asylumship and are deported. But in total, about 0.5% of the entire European population would be classified as irregular refugees. Those people who arrived, and although they've not been granted asylum, are still staying in Europe through various different means. And the big thing that has is that, as we saw, it's a very small population of the entire European continent that is refugee, and even less that are climate refugees. But the impact of that very small amount has had a very large change on European politics overall. And we've mainly seen a massive shift to the far right in response to the immigration and refugee crises since about 2015, 2016. Now, we'll see that there's at least 6 main far-right parties within Europe. Italy with FDI, Finland, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, and the Czech Republic all have open far-right parties that are in control or have a leading coalition within their own country. In addition, Germany's AfD party, which is a far-right party, won for the first time since the Nazis in 1945 seats in parliament and local elections. Now, all these groups, they basically built the support of an anti-immigrant, i.e. anti-Ukrainian, anti-Muslim, anti-Black or Arab, ideology that's very against these people who are non-Europeans. Majority of them coming from conflict zones, or in the case of what we're discussing, areas that are highly impacted by climate change. In fact, about 78% of people, this is a YouGov poll that polled all European countries within the EU, 78% of Italians said that diversity was a negative attribute that they did not want to have. In addition, there was not a single country interviewed that had a majority positive view of diversity. So we really see this very small amount of refugees and non-Europeans coming into the EU, and even Europeans in the case of Ukrainians, who are having an outsized impact on the turn from a very liberal European Union to a much more far-right, much more authoritarian one. And we'll have to see how that pans out in the next couple of years. So now we're on to conclusions. We're going to give you some critical perspectives and some solutions as to how exactly we can mitigate these problems or even solve them. To start off with, we're going to have the environmental solutions. Victor later.
Okay, so environmental solutions. This one's kind of hard because we can't just snap our fingers and rid ourselves of climate change overnight. But the main solutions that we can help support in order to help climate refugees and to possibly stall climate change a little is government cooperation, such as goals like the Paris Accords, just for an example. It does, big agreements such as the Paris Accords that aim to limit the global average of temperature increase, enhance resilience, and to align financial flows in the world to meet these objectives. They're hard to do because it involves cooperation between governments all across the world, which is really tough when we're constantly butting heads all the time. And then also, for example, the Paris Accords, I think, could have done great things, except for we don't have China and we don't have the US, which are 2 world superpowers. But that being said, the Paris Accords are a great example of what could be done. A world agreement like this to do these things is definitely a step in the right direction, and cooperation in the future, collaboration between countries could be a great way to attempt to mitigate the effects of climate change. And this, on a personal level, to do this, we can encourage our governments to be involved in things like this, making it known that we, as people of our own countries, support these things, and then also helping citizens adapt to climate change, which is also tough, especially we don't live in the region of Sudan, for instance, so we can't, and we don't have the means to directly help them, but we can try to indirectly help them in ways like supporting organizations that do help them, and then also increasing our education of climate change and how climate change affects industries such as agriculture, and then hoping that we can then somehow help educate, for instance, farmers in Sudan on better farming practices and ways to use the land even when the weather isn't agreeing with them. Are some ways we can environmentally have an impact on the environment.
Alright, so some economic solutions that we came up with to help climate refugees. So first we have the governments providing financial aid. So we already know that governments do quite financial effort to provide help to climate refugees, but I feel like maybe even doing a bigger effort would be crucial for them. Then we have the creation of new non-governmental organizations that seek to help climate refugees. Again, there's already a few, but this is a problem that has been increasing. And I feel like creating more and more organizations would be really helpful for them. And then lastly, we have, well, this is my idea that I came up with, and it's how governments could maybe save a portion of the taxes or the money they earn from taxes, and then saving that money to provide or to donate it to charity or provide financial aid.
And for me, for the political solutions, I believe the real best thing that can be done is to have a reclassification or a redefining of what exactly is a climate refugee. There should be a revisal or a reevaluation of the 1951 and 1967 refugee protocols and conventions. Maybe creating an umbrella term that encompasses both what is a refugee and what is a climate refugee under a similar or the same category would be able to afford them more legal protections and give them the ability to apply for asylumship. In addition, either a restructuring or a refunding of asylum processes within specifically European and Western countries, as these are the countries that see the most amount of refugees under a legal sense, would be very important. In a lot of cases, specifically within the European and the US sense, the process takes much too long, upwards of 6 years in the case of the US, and often people who apply thinking they have asylumship status will be denied it because they don't have legal protections, or people in the case of, there's a big controversy with Chinese migrants coming into the US right now, that they're taking advantage of the broken system to gain economic opportunities where they really are not being displaced due to any violence or climate-related processes. So a reevaluation of the entire system, in my opinion, is probably going to be the most beneficial. Will this happen? Most likely not, especially in the age of specifically more right-wing authoritarian leaders both within the EU and the US, as we know that those are the people who are the most big power players within the international system. So it seems very unlikely this would happen, but it would be a good place to start. Now, if we have time for questions, we each have one that we'd like to ask. If not, then if you have any questions for us.
Why don't we save the questions for a discussion at the end after we present all three? That way we make sure we have time for everybody. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.